5 years. 5 years of what I once deluded myself into calling a partnership. The quick, chaotic whirlwind of 2019 led to the hasty commitment of 2020. I was naive, utterly so. Sarah, F32, was the only woman I, M35, had ever been with, a fact I now recognize as a profound tactical disadvantage. She, conversely, had the expected roster of school and college partners, a detail I dismissed as irrelevant this month, a grotesque landmark marking the total failure of my judgment. The structural integrity of this marriage was compromised almost from the beginning, weakened by multiple predictable stressors. My low libido, a physical issue I honestly struggled with, was one point of leverage she constantly exploited. Then there was her financial stance, her failed business and her arrogant refusal to secure a conventional 9-to-5 job, yet found the effort required to make her own business succeed equally taxing. This was pure, unsustainable hypocrisy, a demand for luxury funded by zero contribution. Temper issues flared from both sides, certainly, fueled by my escalating frustration and her ingrained sense of entitlement. My smoking, a genuine vice, became another weapon in her arsenal of grievances. But the most insidious tool was the constant threat of divorce, used from the earliest days of our marriage, a psychological hammer held over my head in the marriage itself, a fact most clearly visible in the state of our home. She was a total slob, to a degree that was not merely careless but genuinely hazardous. The kitchen, the dining area, eating food prepared there without my intervention was a health risk. This neglect signaled her true investment level, negligible. It made me feel like an employee covering the domestic debt. These issues were not problems to be solved. They were premeditated vulnerabilities she maintained, knowing they would always provide her with an easy exit and a moral high ground. This foundation of weakness was essential for the structure of her eventual betrayal. My failure was not in my commitment, but in my inability to recognize that my devotion was merely paying the retainer on a contract she intended to breach the moment a better opportunity arose. The entire marriage was a determined breaking point in May. We had a particularly nasty fight. The substance is irrelevant now. It was the mechanism of termination that mattered. We entered a period of cold, calculated silence. I, in my ingrained, pathetic habit of reconciliation, initiated contact via text message, attempting to bypass her temper and express my genuine pain. I was seeking understanding, an emotional olive branch. This act of vulnerability, predictably, was the final trigger she needed. The next morning, the decree was issued. She wanted a divorce. My first reaction was the familiar, desperate ritual of salvage. Oh God, she's doing it again. Okay, man, she's upset. Calm her down, smooth things over. Compromise on your needs, make her feel comforted and safe. This ritual had sustained the marriage for 5 years, but this time, the familiar sequence was down. The demand was absolute. Divorce, immediately. She preemptively shut down all avenues of mediation. No discussion, no visiting the therapist, the same therapist who, ironically, always sided with her, yet whom I endured for her comfort. She demanded divorce by mutual consent, a clean, swift break, promising not to ask for any financial settlement. This was the first true indicator of her planning. Why the haste? Why the necessary temporal delay? Citing my career advancement application, an application that benefited significantly from the appearance of a stable marriage. I would not reveal the details. The necessity of maintaining a facade of stability was my single strategic priority. She accepted the delay, pivoting instantly to the demand for physical separation. I was to leave the house immediately. The house we occupied was her mother's, Marion's. We lived there to support Marion after her husband passed. This location was another vulnerability. Any attempt by me to leave previously had been met with Marion's emotional manipulation, designed to keep her daughter compliant. Helicopter parent, could not bear autonomous decisions made by her adult child. This provided Sarah with the perfect cover. She wasn't running from the marriage. She was fulfilling her duty to her mother while forcing me out. The pieces of the separation plan were falling into place, all designed to make my departure look like my failure, my capitulation, while granting her complete control over the physical and emotional space. I was being engineered into the villain of the piece. I initiated a series of talks, attempting to understand the mentality behind her divorce. I genuinely believed we could salvage the marriage. I was still operating under the false premise that the problems lay within our contract, not outside of it. Her answers were predictably vague, delivered with the sanctimonious tone of a that I've lost myself. Now, I need to be selfish, I need to find myself, I need to discover myself. This is my journey of self-healing. I can't be weighed down by the social contract of marriage. She refused to offer any concrete details about what exactly restricted her within our marriage. I had never been abusive, never restricted her freedom. She had her own friends and drove my car more than I did. Yet, she clung to the narrative of my emotional oppression. This was the second indicator of her calculated plan, creating a narrative of victimhood and necessity for a contingency plan. We could divorce, stay apart for 2 to 3 years, and if we both showed progress, we could reunite, not under the archaic institution of marriage, but with love or something, and then, crucially, have a child together. This was a profound strategic error on her part, an overreach of control. I immediately shut down that option. I stated firmly that marriage was non-negotiable for me if we were to have a child. I refused to subject a child to the instability of separated parents shuffling custody week to week. This confrontation went nowhere, cementing her desire to proceed with the separation, taking the time I needed to secure my career advancement application facade. After a fruitless search for suitable accommodation, I strategically chose to move to my father's place across the city. The separation occurred in early June. My departure was not a retreat, it was a tactical repositioning. I was moving out of the theater of conflict to gain perspective and solidify my personal resources, but I was not abandoning the strategic field. I resolved to use this time for self-improvement, preparing myself for whatever the next phase of her calculated destruction entailed. I would work on my temper, my health, and my smoking, not for her, but to eliminate the weaknesses she had. Was not a defeat. It was a forced retreat that I instantly converted into a period of intense personal refinement. I took this life lesson seriously, meticulously dismantling the weaknesses she had weaponized against me. I engaged a therapist to address my temper issues, eliminating that point of leverage. I committed to working out rigorously, targeting the improvement of my low libido. Most importantly, I began the difficult process of quitting smoking, removing the most visible and easily condemned vice. Purely emotional responses, they were a strategic cleansing of vulnerabilities. I was removing every external justification for her divorce narrative. As I made progress, I provided her with regular, meticulously documented updates, detailing my commitment to self-improvement and reconciliation. My affirmations were genuine, but their delivery was strategic. They reinforced my image as the devoted, repentant husband desperately clinging about the divorce, agreeing only to maintain the facade until my career application was complete. Her reasons remained the same: vague, sanctimonious sentiments, self-healing, discovery, being selfish about her love. These repetitive, hollow phrases were the third, most alarming indicator of her deception. My suspicion was intense. I knew the narrative didn't align with the reality of our conflicts. However, I deliberately absolutely hates cheaters, having verbally dismantled an acquaintance for infidelity just the year before. I held on to the belief that she was fundamentally moral, choosing to believe the best in her despite the overwhelming evidence of her deception. This choice to believe was not naive, it was strategic containment. To accuse her without proof would be to lose the strategic high ground and prematurely detonate the conflict. I needed time and evidence. I continued to play the role of the devoted, self-improving husband, providing the updates and affirmations that reinforced her narrative of my inadequacy and eventual lie, secure in the belief that I was still operating under her emotional control. This security was my greatest weapon, allowing her to drop her guard and leave the necessary evidence for my eventual, decisive counterattack. The period of self-improvement was not just about fixing myself, it was about preparing the theater. Finally presented itself 2 weeks prior to the events of my current discovery. She initiated contact, asking me to return to the house under the mundane, plausible pretext of pet-sitting the cats while she visited a nearby city where her cousin lived. I agreed immediately. This request was a profound tactical mistake on her part, predicated entirely on her confidence in my obedience and her belief in the stability of her divorce narrative, but as a covert intelligence operation. As expected, the house was a mess, a testament to her consistent domestic contempt. I began my methodical cleanup, moving through the kitchen, dining room, hall, my old office room, and finally, our shared bedroom. This was not domestic servitude, it was systematic evidence gathering. The true target was the side table, a repository of intimate, meticulously removing items one by one, organizing and sorting them. That's when I found it: 2 condoms. The discovery struck with clinical clarity. We had not used condoms for the past year. We had been actively trying to conceive. Moreover, the brand was entirely foreign to me, one I had never purchased. The alarm bells were immediate and deafening, but my reaction was controlled. I immediately messaged my younger brother, who lives across the country, presenting the facts without accusation. His reply confirmed my analysis. There was no evidence was inconclusive. She could easily dismiss the discovery with a casual lie. "Oh, that's something a friend dropped by, it slipped out of her purse." I needed more. The initial suspicion had been confirmed, but the strategic value was zero without concrete, undeniable proof. The condoms were merely the receipt of a transaction. I needed the contract itself. I maintained my composure, completing the cat-sitting duty without revealing my discovery was now a heavy, secret burden, a piece of intelligence I carried alone. The visit to her cousin's city, ostensibly for a family visit, suddenly looked like a cover for a clandestine rendezvous. I filed that suspicion away, preparing for the next, inevitable opportunity she would provide me. I left the house as the devoted ex-husband, ensuring my performance remained flawless, my inner certainty hardening into the resolve needed for the next phase of the decisive action arrived yesterday, perfectly timed by her own negligence. I visited her at the part-time place where she was subbing for a friend, ostensibly to finalize the logistics for my pet-sitting duties over the upcoming weekend trip she had planned. The setting was ideal, casual, relaxed, and devoid of the hypervigilance she usually maintained. Her complaint was mundane. One of her phone apps wasn't working, and she asked me to fix it. I saw the opening. This was the moment I had inviting chasm of her trust. I needed a distraction. I asked her to fetch me some water. As soon as she stepped out of the room, the operation began. I bypassed the malfunctioning app and went straight for the target, her message applications. I found multiple names I didn't recognize, men's names. The evidence was compelling, but slow manual extraction was too risky. I executed the critical, strategic maneuver. I quickly synced her WhatsApp to my laptop silent and completed seconds before she returned with the water. I closed the laptop, my composure absolute, showing no sign of the profound violation I had just enacted. I then feigned being overly tired from the heat, using physical exhaustion as a mask for my inner turmoil. I left the part-time place immediately and drove straight to my father's house. The moment I was alone, the forensic examination began. I opened my laptop, and the evidence flooded the screen. The reality was far worse, and far more calculated than I had imagined. It wasn't just physical infidelity, it was a comprehensive digital subreddits, actively posting photos of her private areas, and verifying herself online. The contempt was staggering. I realized the condoms were merely the surface. The digital world revealed a deep, narcissistic hole she was trying to fill, not with genuine love, but with validation from strangers. This was the core of data provided the unvarnished blueprint of her deception. The sheer volume and coldness of her planning were astonishing. I found evidence of at least 4 distinct partners. The lies she had constructed to justify her actions were meticulously detailed and venomous. She had told these men that she was already divorced since last December, effectively erasing the final year of our marriage. Worse, she had weaponized my vulnerabilities, painting me as incapable, impotent, and abusive. The accusation of abuse, a complete fabrication, as I have never once laid a finger on her, was the final, unforgivable goldmine of evidence. I immediately began recording everything with screencap software. Dates, times, numbers, locations of rendezvous, explicit kinks and fetishes, voice notes confirming plans, and the intimate details of their encounters. This was not just proof of infidelity, it was the documented destruction of my reputation. I also found the receipts of her paranoia. She had undergone STD tests for HIV and herpes. This was the final, sickening confirmation of the physical risks she had introduced beyond her partners. She had lied to her closest confidants, telling her best friends that I was abusive and distant. And the most narcissistic revelation, her gloating. She reveled in posting her body on Reddit, receiving hundreds of DMs, and finding the entire experience validating. Her self-healing journey was nothing more than a desperate quest for external validation funded by lies and reckless physical behavior. The tactical nature of her betrayal was the timeline. The earliest non-disappearing text I could find was from June 8, the exact day I had left the house. This confirmed that her self-healing phase was merely the operational code for her sexual freedom. The disappearing messages before that date suggested the planning had begun earlier, but she had only felt safe enough to disable the feature once I was physically absent. Calculated fury. She hadn't started cheating because I left. She forced me to leave so she could cheat. I was engineered a minor technical failure that led to immediate, major operational exposure. When I relaunched the WhatsApp sync, I saw I had been kicked out. The notification on her phone had been triggered. Less than a minute later, she called me, her voice sharp and demanding, the performance of the distraught wife completely gone. She wanted to know if I had was instantaneous and controlled. I played it off as complete ignorance, feigning bewilderment. I blamed my exhaustion from the heat, claiming I was asleep. She sounded like she bought the lie, the ingrained familiarity of my excuses providing a safety net for her. But her subsequent remark was the final dose of venom, sealing my rage and hardening my resolve. You didn't sink? Oh okay, good. For a minute there, I was thinking the worst of you. The irony was a physical blow. She, the perpetrator of elaborate, destructive deceit, was accusing me of thinking now would be an act of emotional suicide. I would lose the high ground, and she would simply deny, deflect, and use her pre-constructed narrative of my abuse to nullify my evidence. My immediate priority shifted from evidence gathering to emotional containment and strategic support. I could not be alone. I called my best mates, my true, reliable support network. They rushed over, listening to the entire sordid account, immediately understanding the gravity of the betrayal. Support, taking me out for food and a movie, was the necessary ballast to prevent my emotional collapse. They immediately became my counsel, ensuring I maintained my cool head and stuck to the long-term plan. I had to continue playing the role of the devoted, if heartbroken, husband. The rage was internal, controlled, channeled into the meticulous review of the screen recordings. The betrayal was not merely physical, it was a total war on my character again and again, realizing the profound contamination. She had committed these acts, I later confirmed from Reddit posts on our marital bed. The contamination was total, a physical and emotional desecration of our shared life. I was no longer fighting for reconciliation, I was fighting for retribution. My resolve arrived earlier today, a calculated check-in from her during her vacation. She called, her voice dripping with artificial sentimentality, claiming she missed me and loved me, even as she confirmed the permanence of the divorce. This was her attempt to soften the blow, to maintain emotional control, and to ensure I remained a compliant resource. She added the unbelievable insult. She had learned so much from me about punctuality, cleanliness, and discipline. A grotesque irony, given the state of the house and the moral filth she was currently swimming in. I maintained a straight face, playing the part of the husband still open to reconciliation. The call quickly pivoted to her true strategic objective, the future genetic contract. She reiterated her absurd proposal about preserving our genetic material for when we might have a baby, a child born outside of marriage, based on some nebulous love or something. This was the final, definitive security of my genes, combined with the social freedom of divorce, all without the institutional accountability of marriage. I delivered my final, non-negotiable decree. My voice was firm, stripped of all emotion, echoing the protocol she pretended to despise. I will not have a child out of wedlock. Marriage may be an archaic institution for you, but it is sacred for me. I refuse to raise a child when the parents are separated and not married. I do not believe that makes for a good household to raise the child. If divorce is something you really want, then I'll give it to you. The sound of her annoyance was audible, a brief flash of the true contempt she held for my values. I had successfully severed the final, most crucial point of future leverage she sought. After some more meaningless small talk, the call ended. I now knew I could maintain a flawless, emotionless lie. My strategic silence are ensuring I maintain distance, ensuring she can't use the cats or the house as a pretext to draw me back into her orbit. I knew for a fact, based on the evidence, that her current vacation was merely a cover for another rendezvous. My resolve hardened. I would play the villain until the moment of my final narrative and check the recordings. A crucial, horrifying detail emerged, extending the timeline of her betrayal and deepening the conspiracy. My initial assumption was that the cheating began after I left the house on June 8. The discovery of the disappearing messages feature being turned off on that day suggested she felt confident to discard digital caution once my physical presence of the condoms and the early planning texts, even if erased, pointed to a more insidious timeline. The cheating was not initiated by my departure. The planning and initial digital contacts were already in place while we were still arguing in May. The demand for divorce was merely the execution of her exit strategy, already built around her established infidelity timeline. This realization changed the nature of her betrayal from opportunistic cheating to premeditated conspiracy. She didn't leave to find herself. She found her replacements first, then forced the divorce. The self-healing narrative was a complete and total fabrication designed to cover the logistical operation of her sexual freedom. Her use of Reddit subreddits specializing in casual encounters, her verification photos of her private areas. These acts were not desperate, but narcissistic and deliberate. The explicit details in the WhatsApp chats, dates, times, locations, kinks, voice notes, provided the unassailable proof. This evidence was not merely for my personal validation. It was the ammunition for my legal and social war. I now possessed the full context of her victim narrative. She was actively constructing the lie that I was an abusive, impotent, distant husband to justify her actions to her lovers, her friends, and potentially that she had successfully poisoned the social well against me. Everyone, her mother, her sister, her nephews, her brother-in-law, believed her performance. My role as the quiet, abusive, inadequate husband was established in their minds. My future required not just legal separation, but the total destruction of her potent, corrosive force. I am walking a tightrope, playing the part of the naive, heartbroken husband while the digital evidence burns a hole in my laptop. The strategy is clear. Maintain silence and patience until the time is right. Any confrontation now would be premature, emotional, and self-destructive. If I confront her, she will default to her victim narrative, denial, tears, accusations of my paranoia, and confirmation of her previous claims of my abuse. The evidence would be nullified by her emotional performance, and I would lose operating under the illusion of control, allowing her to finalize her deception and commit the final errors that will secure my victory. My friends are my essential support structure, ensuring my emotional state remains stable and my strategy remains cold. They act as my moral compass and my tactical counsel, preventing me from succumbing to the immediate, desperate urge to confront her, to face her, her mother, her elder sister, and her in-laws with the undeniable truth. They all believe I was the abuser. They all believe she deserves her freedom and her self-healing. The desire to witness the moment their trust shatters is a powerful motivator. But I must stay the villain for now. I must continue to play the part of the weak, repentant man who couldn't satisfy his wife. This facade protects my application while still legally married, securing my professional future before the inevitable social collapse. I also need to ensure that the divorce process itself is initiated on my terms, with the strongest possible legal standing. The evidence I have, the timestamps, the locations, the specific accusations she made against me, will be used not for messy courtroom drama, but for leverage and negotiation, ensuring the separation is swift, final, and financially clean. The reckoning is inevitable, but its timing must be dictated by strategy. Emotionally contaminating discovery was the location of her betrayal. The Reddit posts I found confirmed with chilling certainty that she committed adultery on our marital bed. This detail elevated the betrayal from a personal trauma to a comprehensive defilement of our shared space. The house, which I had cleaned and organized during my last visit, was not merely messy, it was contaminated. The sheets, the side table, the very air of the bedroom were tainted by her calculated already deceit. Fragile due to my low libido, were now permanently corrupted by the knowledge of her narcissistic validation and her partner's presence. The two condoms, the initial clue, suddenly took on a profound significance. They were not just evidence, they were the physical tokens of the foreign contamination she introduced into our home. The knowledge of her needing STD tests for HIV and herpes filled me with a deep, consuming revulsion and justified my strategic approach. She had been reckless with my physical health as well as my emotional meant that the house, her mother's house, could never be home again. My exit was final, and necessary for my physical and psychological safety. This was not a matter of mere infidelity, it was a profound act of disrespect and moral corruption. I realized that my attempts at reconciliation, my promises of self-improvement, were not just futile but were an insult to the reality of the situation. While I was desperately trying to fix myself to save the marriage, she was actively destroying the marriage in the most destructive and disrespectful way easily during our phone call, telling me she missed me and loved me, while the reality of her betrayal was fresh in my mind, confirmed her status as a high-functioning sociopath. The final act of cleaning the house was an unconscious attempt to reclaim the space, a desperate effort to scrub away the contamination she had introduced. That effort was ultimately futile, but the cleaning process led directly to the evidence, proving that even her slovenliness and negligence worked in my strategic defense is the weaponization of the abuse narrative. By preemptively establishing me as the abusive, distant, impotent husband to her friends and lovers, she has inoculated herself against my eventual confrontation. This lie provides her with both motive, escape from abuse, and justification, sexual freedom due to my inadequacy. This narrative has been effectively distributed through her social network, ensuring that any public accusation from me will be dismissed as the desperate, retaliatory act of a guilty, controlling husband, but against the perception she has so carefully manufactured. My strategy must therefore be equally precise. I must dismantle the narrative without engaging in direct confrontation. The evidence, the timestamps, the dates, the specific accusations in her messages, will be used to counter the general, vague claims of abuse. For example, if she claims I was distant, I have records of my attempts at reconciliation. If she claims abuse, I have witnesses, my friends, to my current, controlled behavior and zero physical digital proof of her narcissistic validation. Her gloating about the hundreds of DMs and validation from strangers, coupled with the explicit photos she posted online, destroys her claim to moral victimhood. This evidence, strategically leaked or revealed, transforms her from the victim of abuse into a manipulative, fame-seeking narcissist. This is the crucial shift. I must change the perception of the conflict from husband versus wife to truth versus fabricated reality. The goal is not to win the divorce settlement, which she waived, but to win the separation, and my public commitment to self-improvement are vital components of this counter-narrative. I am painting myself as the reasonable man striving for reconciliation, while she is unknowingly confirming her recklessness through her continued travel and secrecy. Every day of my silence is a day she spends digging her own execution depend entirely on the counsel and support of my best friends. Their immediate, unwavering belief in me after reviewing the damning evidence was the lifeline that prevented my complete emotional collapse. Their support transformed my overwhelming individual burden into a coordinated strategic effort. They are not merely comforting me, they are actively enforcing the strategic silence and maintaining the cool head required for this operation. Tactical mandates: containment, documentation, and extrication. Containment means ensuring I do not break silence prematurely. They are physically checking on me, ensuring the rage does not override the strategy. They are my emotional guardrails. Documentation is ongoing. They have verified the integrity of the screen recordings, ensuring the dates and contexts are preserved for legal use. They understand that the digital evidence is the single most powerful weapon I possess. They are actively helping me sever the remaining logistical ties she attempts to maintain, such as pet-sitting the cats. Their understanding is that any lingering obligation is a vulnerability she can exploit. My compliance with her requests would only reinforce her delusion of control. Therefore, they are helping me construct believable excuses to ensure I cannot be asked to watch the house again. Preventing her from using my kindness as a cover for her continued infidelity because my own judgment is compromised by the emotional betrayal. The immediate, irrational desire to confront her, to witness the moment of her humiliation, is my greatest weakness. They are the voice of cold logic, reminding me that revenge served hot is messy and unprofitable, while revenge served cold is surgical and definitive. The strategic victory requires patience. I must continue to embody the victimized, inadequate husband who is trying to heal, even as I meticulously prepare the ground for her total social and moral destruction. The silence is not fear, it is the preparation for the detonation. The support of my allies ensures that the detonation occurs precisely when and where it causes maximum, irreparable damage. Mandate is clear. I must maintain the facade until the career application is approved, and until I have secured the strongest legal footing. The career advancement is my professional security, the foundation that her betrayal cannot destroy. I will use the legal fact of our ongoing marriage to my advantage for this application, a final exploitation of the institution she despises. Once that is secured, the terms of the war change entirely. It will not be a messy emotional explosion but a calculated, clinical delivery of facts. The confrontation will not be public, not initially. It will be a private delivery of the evidence package to her, presented with the same cold, emotionless tone I used when denying her the child. This private confrontation will serve two purposes. First, to establish that I know everything, thereby shattering her perception of security. And second, to force her cooperation in a swift, uncontested divorce. Under the threat of public exposure of her online activities and the abuse narrative will be selective. I will not engage in general slander, but I will ensure that the most important people, Victor, Marion, and her sister, receive the truth, dismantling her claims of my abuse and exposing her narcissistic lies. This measured, surgical exposure will destroy her credibility where it matters most, without subjecting me to the messiness of a public divorce trial. The ultimate retribution is not financial, it is reputational. She sought validation and built her new freedom on a foundation of lies about my character. Demolish that foundation, leaving her with the freedom she craved, but stripped of the respect she demanded. I will grant her the divorce. I will not grant her a child. I will not grant her absolution. I will grant her only the cold, unvarnished reality of the life she chose, stripped bare of the victimhood she so desperately manufactured. My silence is my power, and the recordings are my final, unassailable decree.